thank you for NAAP, or the Network of Asian Environmental Philosophy. It's such an honor to be able to uh, join this online symposium, and I'm truly glad because I didn't know that there is such forum. In fact, I think there's also another Indonesian that I read from the research that you just discussed, Mrs. Rika Fajrini, and looking at her background, that she's actually in the Indonesian environmental law, and that's truly interesting for me because I'm also in the background of law as well. So honestly, it's really great. Thank you for the opportunity. So anyway, I think I have a short time, 15 minutes. So allow me to discuss with you about the things that I'm interested, which is Indonesian environmental philosophy of coexisting with nature. So Indonesia being a state in one of the state in Southeast Asia actually hits a lot of costumes and culture that really connected with nature. So what I wanted to talk that there are 4 points. Introduction, and then shortly about the background, and then about the Indonesian environmental philosophy, and then how to save the fading value of Indonesian environmental philosophy, and then closing regarding a conclusion and some suggestions to be made. Uh, Without further ado, so what I wanted to discuss is regarding the concept of the environmental philosophy itself. So from what I hear, in that there are different concepts of environmental philosophy, and to be honest, I'm really interested in environmental philosophy because there are not many people that discusses about environmental philosophy. In fact, in Indonesia, despite of the customs and cultures that respects environment or nature, in the end they just consider it as just a local value, or just a formality in the background, and it becomes a question when we acknowledge ourselves as environmentalists, but in the end, in the reality, that's not the case. I guess Mrs. Rika Fajrini may share some proof about it. But either way, so in Indonesia, there's also the same debate that's brought by Nice, which I believe is also an expert in the environmental philosophy or environmental bioecology study, that the concept of the world depends on human and in or anthropology rather than nature. And so it becomes a question: is nature exists for human, or is it human exists to preserve nature? So what I'm interested in to discuss is that in Indonesia, the concept or the modern concept of Indonesian environmental philosophy is actually to discuss about the relationship between human and natural environment, and how the relationship actually define the society that lives in a natural environment. So focusing on the background, does Indonesia recognize environmental philosophy? It actually does recognize it, even though they don't really admit it bluntly. They recognize it in the form of customs and cultures. For instance, in this picture, there is the something that's called Labuhan Merapi ceremony, in which they actually pray to the Merapi mountain. It's a mountain in, I think it's in Central Java, and they hope that the mountain doesn't erupt, or show off their volcanoes. And it's, for some people, consider that it's weird, it's old, it's unbelievable, irrational, but they realize that the existence of Merapi mountain actually provides whatever that they need, the society, especially in Merapi area. So by their doing their ceremony, they actually admit it, although only in the way of customs. So, however, it begs the question: does it really still being upheld up to the present day? Because in the modern day or present day, there are not many people who wants to admit such customs. They consider it as old ways or retro thinking. So what I want to discuss is actually the 2 points. So what exactly is Indonesian environmental philosophy, and how can the society save the fading values of Indonesian environmental philosophy? Talking about Indonesian environmental philosophy, one Indonesian, I would say environmentalist, because I think his work is actually on, uh, I think, economic ecology. But I would consider this expert, or Mr. Sonic Caraff, to be the exact embodiment of Indonesian environmental philosophy, because he actually speaks about what it means to live in Indonesia. Um, he states that the relationship between human, or in Indonesia, the Indonesians, their economy and nature has to be balanced. One of which he was acting as the minister of environment or forestry ministry back in 1999 and 2000 until 2001. And he actually states that there are a lot of asphalt industry, or some industry or factories in Indonesia that destroys the environment and the living society's space. Therefore, each environment or nature should be the leader or the command in the build in the revolution or in the reformation of the society. And I think this opinion is interesting because we never see nature as the lead command, or chief of command. Yeah, I mean, if we were to put it on the American way, chief of command. But still, I think this is exactly what's interesting, because in Indonesia we don't really see nature as a supplement, or just as something that's to accompany us, but instead it's something that leads us. So what's interesting, or in my research or studies, that the spirit of Indonesian environmental philosophy is basically that the civilization of Indonesia is actually built under the existence of nature. And if I were to pick one of the values from the customs that's applied in Indonesia society in Moluccas, it's actually that what is taken from the nature must be exchanged for nature as well. So it's a some sort of what is it? The rule of balance, take and give. So that's something that's actually is being held by Indonesian society, no matter where they are. Either it's Moluccas or in Java or Bataknis. So some examples that's being applied in Indonesia that adhere to Indonesian environmental philosophy is one of the customs that applied in Moluccas society is Aloha Waras. It's actually a custom or an event where there are people, only several people. For instance, a day in this Friday, um, Mr. A has to fish, and when he got the fish, he has to share it with the whole village. I mean, some would say that that's so terrible. I mean, a fisherman has to enjoy their gain, but then again, in Moluccas, they consider it as an act of respect and a form of welfare fulfillment. So in a way, this custom actually limits the fishing practice, so that the number of fishes in the sea or in the river is not decreased in the amount of unacceptable amount. Uh, and then there's also another customs in Sumba, or uh, East Nusa Tenggara, where It's called a Mangenjing customs, where they actually pray to their god known as Marapu, different to Merapi. Merapi is the name of a mountain, but Marapu in their language or Sumbanis is actually their god. Um, well, some of this custom in Mangenjing is actually considering of sacrificing lambs and chickens. It might be controversial, but what I want to take from their customs is actually the purpose of this custom or this ceremony is for them to renew their life or to reflect what their life means. So in a way, they sacrifice some animals, but in a way they say that they don't want to destroy another life. So this kind of ceremony is actually conducted once a year, and they don't want to harm another animal. So when they make a mistake, they try to fix it through this ceremony. So if I were to say, for their mistakes, only one correction in this sacrificial lamb. Another interesting Indonesian customs is actually called Rimbu Larangan. That I am interested that in the workshop previously that it said that about the meaning of nature in Indonesian language, alam. It's this people or Minangkabau tribe actually considers alam to be called as teacher, instead of being the living breathing environment or as the supporting aspects. They consider nature as teacher, and it is truly interesting because this tribe Minangkabau, they actually respect forest. They come to the forest, they pray, and then they rub the trees, asking for guidance. So whenever they are forced uh, to do a logging activity, such as cutting down the trees, they have to consult it to the chief of tribe, and then the chief of tribe would say that you should not do this, you should not do that, because the gods would be angry, and you should know that these are your teachers. You should heed them, ask them. There should be another option. So it's really interesting, and I think that's one of the most respectful tribes in Indonesia, because I just realized it now. I never know that Indonesian tribes would respect nature in this way. And maybe just a last example is actually Bataknis, because I'm of this tribe. So Bataknis or northern Sumatra, tribe is actually also respects the existence of water. So there is this place called Toba Lake, and basically to be called as a teacher, instead of being the living breathing environment or as the supporting aspects. They consider nature as teacher, and it is truly interesting because this tribe Minangkabau, they actually respect forest. They come to the forest, they pray, and then they rub the trees, asking for guidance. So whenever they are forced to do a logging activity, such as cutting down the trees, they have to consult it to the chief of tribe, and then the chief of tribe would say that you should not do this, you should not do that, because the gods would be angry, and you should know that these are your teachers. You should heed them, ask them. There should be another option. So it's really interesting, and I think that's one of the most respectful tribes in Indonesia, because I just realized it now. I never know that Indonesian tribes would respect nature in this way. And maybe just a last example is actually Bataknis because I'm of this tribe. So Bataknis or northern Sumatra tribe is actually also respects the existence of water. So there is this place called Toba Lake, and basically we thought lake would be a place of romantic, like Lake House by Keanu Reeves, right? But in Indonesia, they actually respect this lake as a provider of wealth and health fair. So they do this water ceremony and hope that the water stays clean. In fact, whenever people found to be to pollute the water, they would be processed legally, and then in the customs way they have to do the ceremony. And if mind you that the cost is not cheap, there are a lot of people, the the accused, there are only one accused, but he has to include a lot of people to do the ceremony. So from these examples, I have gathered that the whole point of the Indonesian environmental philosophy is actually to coexist with nature. Once again, the people in Indonesian people recognize that nature as something that's not only to be lived by, but not only live accompanied with, but is also lived by and live for the nature. Then again, it's not a surprise that there are also many people that disregard this philosophy, because people would say that it's not real, it's irrational. People don't really see it as a reality. It's illogical, and these days, is it Generation Z or the millennials would see that no, it's not right. It's not considered to be true by my role model, influencer, or this YouTuber. So it's such a irony, because our previous generation would respect it no matter what. And one of the expert, Mr. Mubarak, would say that the traditional customs tend to be viewed as irrational. So what really happens is the act of destruction of nature. Actually, the act of burning forests. That, well, we're not proud, but it's not really a secret anymore. I mean, back in Borneo, Borneo used to be, I think it's the heart of the world, because it has the biggest or the largest forest. But the majority of Borneo is actually consists of Indonesian forests, whereas is it the half or a quarter of the forest in Borneo is owned by Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam. And it's such a disappointment and our shame, because we should not do that. But again, these people don't heed the traditional customs, and there's also cost of trashes that already filled a lot of seas in Indonesia. And for instance, the act of burning forests, and then the act of illegal logging caused landslides. In the end, it affects humans in the most ways that not many people think in the long-term use. So it's such a shame, and I think how to save this Indonesian environmental philosophy values is actually by applying the logics, or discussing what the customs actually mean. For instance, Nur Hayati, or one of the Indonesian, I think she's a social major, but I think her research still is relevant, because she argues by her research that Mount Merapi eruption can be predicted by the Labuhan Merapi ceremony, considering that the frequency of the conduct of the ceremony through the knowledge of the smell of sulfur. So in a way, the practice of the ceremony is actually is about predicting if the amount of smell of the sulfur is increasing. That means it's going to erupt. Back then, although I don't really know how far it helps, but I think the logic of these customs is actually it has to be appreciated, because people back in the past made these customs as a way to respect the nature and to acknowledge how relevant nature in their life. So, how to save Indonesian environmental philosophy? Well, considering my background is a law, so I would say you have to go with the law, you have to go with the acts, you have to go with the statutes, and we have that in Act 32 of 2009. Then again, the enactment or the practice of law has to follow it, has to adhere to the Indonesian environmental philosophy, not only for the economical means, but also the spirit of it. Because if we're talking about economical means, that doesn't necessarily means the preservation of environment. So that's why the second point is to be conscious of the importance what nature means for the living of society. And then since I am also working as a judge in Indonesia, I'm also interested that to note that the judges also needs to apply the environmental philosophy, because we are only see the concept of justice and the certainty of law, but we don't really recognize or we don't really understand the environmental philosophy. So it's interesting that Indonesian judges must, well, not only Indonesian judges but also other judges, but Indonesian judges must realize the importance of environmental philosophy. So whenever they act the law, they have to see what the nature means, so that they don't make judgment only for the law, only for the economy, but they also have to make the judgment or the law products following the environmental spirits. They have to withhold. They have to uphold the importance of uh, preservation of law, preservation of nature, and then of course putting aside the prejudices of Indonesian customs, because no matter how silly it is, no matter how complicated or how old or traditional the customs, but I think by the advancement of research or study, that there should be a logical reasoning behind these customs. So to close this presentation, I would like to conclude that the Indonesian environmental philosophy actually puts nature at the top of the hierarchy and provides livelihood to humans. That's why I think that in Indonesian environmental philosophy, the humans coexist with nature. In fact, such coexisting relation puts nature at the top of the hierarchy, and they respect it as their teacher. And the lack of respect towards Indonesian custom actually is a disgrace, and it should be skipped and needs to be fixed, because otherwise they would violate and exploit nature. And some suggestion actually on the legal aspects. But what's important is that the traditional customs must be embraced, and while maintaining the logic of the reasoning behind it. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.